Hello and welcome to the Culture Roundtable brought to you by Culture in Sport, where culture is critical to long-term success. For the past few years, Culture in Sports has been educating and influencing organizations, sports organizations and or not, teams, coaches, staff, and even other athletes about the importance of culture and leadership in sports, as it greatly impacts organizational success, as well as promotes a healthy environment for your team and your people. Athlete performance and the mental impact and physical impact of sports can't be understated or overstated, but done in an appropriate way, right? So the physical and emotional health of athletes is paramount to us. So our mantra is that that critical culture is critical for long-term success, and we strive to promote these every day in our work. And so positively influencing others and educating sports organizations, front offices, sports staff, and athletes on the impact of leadership. And culture is what we work with on a daily basis. So I am your guest host, Angie Parker, and I am the Chief of Staff at Culture in Sports. And I would like to introduce our Culture Roundtable. The purpose of today's webinar is to highlight military veterans in all areas of sports. We sometimes see it in like the NFL, but in this conversation, we're going to talk with our everyday veterans in sports and learn about how they got in, how they entered the sports industry, whether it was before, during, or after, where they're going with their sports endeavors and their current roles. So first off, I'd like to introduce Koma Gandhi. Koma is a Harvard and Georgetown alum, a Navy veteran, and seasoned executive with a very interesting background in startups, nonprofits, and sports. She serves on the executive board of Women's Elite Rugby and is working to launch the first U.S. professional women's rugby league in 2025. Koma, thanks for being here. We also have Brandon here. Brandon Miller is a trailblazing motorcycle professional and American land speed record holder, known for his achievements at the Pikes Peak Hill Climb. And his engineering innovations in electric motorcycles have defined performance standards, and his journey is guided by his deep commitment to martial arts and Zen philosophy. Brandon, thank you for being here. Ian Ramsdell is the CEO of Kupros Inc. and inventor of a very novel, interesting filament, a metal filament for 3D printed electronics. Certainly intrigues me as a tinkerer. Ian brings extensive experience in defense and deep tech innovation. Retired from the military, he co-founded the New England Warriors sled hockey team, expanding recreational opportunities for veterans and disabled children across New England. Ian, thank you for being here. So I would like to turn it over to Koma. Did I miss anything in your intro or that you would like to share? And also I'd like to hear about how you came into sports and what that looks like for your life.
Sure, thanks. For me, I've always been encouraged to be an athlete from the time I was small, participating in youth sports, high school sports, spent a couple years as part of the women's soccer program at Harvard, and then put down the round ball and picked up an oval ball and been chasing it for the better part of 30 years. I think for me, sports has always been a compliment, and especially when I was on active duty, finding different people all over the world where I was traveling, especially with rugby being a global sport, it was sort of an extension of that community. When I was on active duty and in the reserves, I worked with a lot of women who were like-minded and wanted to support military women's rugby. So for a while, we were part of an unofficial program called Combined Services Rugby, which eventually the Armed Forces Sports Councils picked up service rugby for women as they had for men. So it was an amazing achievement just to work really hard with a lot of military rugby players, female military rugby players from across the services. And after many decades of proving that there was interest in the services, finally service teams got funded a few years ago. And I also work with the all Navy men's rugby team. So I'm part of service rugby as well, and kind of unorthodox as a woman coaching a men's rugby team. But I think for me, it's always been a complement and an extension of my service, and it's allowed me to continue to be connected to the community in a unique way, where it's just an extension of the brotherhood and sisterhood that we experienced when we were in uniform.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you for that. That's great. I absolutely agree. Brandon, would you like to add anything to your intro and share with us how you got into sports and the unique and interesting things you're doing now? Oh, you're on mute.
There we go. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I've also always been in sports since I was a little kid, did football, and I think that was the primary one that I started with, and then track and field. And then when I got to Japan, I picked up judo and karate and only a little bit of that, Kyudo, all sorts of different Japanese sports. And then after I got back and got into the Air Force, I also did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I led the DLI team for judo, and we ended up going to like Claudio Francesca's USA Open with a small team, and from there just continued on doing, finding ways to keep active and be entertained.
Fascinating. So how many bones have you broken?
A lot, yeah, a lot. Yeah. Did you know that the collarbone only takes 14 pounds of direct pressure to break?
No, I did not, but I makes sense. Seems very fragile when you say it that way.
Yeah, very fragile. So it really depends on how one rolls and things like that when you're in the martial arts, if you get dropped or something like that. There was this one instance where I was running and I had to get over a fence. And so I ran and I did a judo flip over the fence or judo roll. And I actually broke my collarbone when I came down on the other side. It didn't stop me from continuing to do what I was doing there, but I was able to, achieve the goal with a broken collarbone. But then I had to go back home and fix it up. And the reason I knew about it was because I broke my collarbone in a Batsudan, which is an X tournament over in Japan. It's one of the ways that you can get belts. You can either go through like the typical process where you do like forms and stuff like that in front of people, or you can go to one of these tournaments where only so many belts are awarded and you have to work your way into the top echelon to get them. And I accidentally dislocated somebody's shoulder, which almost disqualified me from continuing on. And then later on in the tournament, I broke my collarbone. So yeah.
Fascinating. We could, I think, go on for days on all the things we've broken or injured in sports and maybe the military too. But
Yes.
Ian, what would you like to add to that short intro, and share a little bit more about how you got into sports and the crossover with military?
Yeah, no, since I was my service was cut early at 15 years and I was medically retired. I spent my last couple of years recovering at Walter Reed with a bunch of individuals that were severely injured and mostly traumatically through their service in the wars that we had going on. And so that was eye-opening to me, and it really helped me uh, come out of my own self-imposed exile I had put myself through while I was going through that treatment to break out of that. And when you get put in that status, one of the weird things that happens is you fall under the biggest stigma that all military members find themselves, which is now you're broken and useless. And when you have that stigma, especially when you're still on active duty, it's real tough to you find yourself isolated from some of your fellow service members, and it's tough to find your way back. And I started out playing sports in high school and in Papuana football and stuff like that. Was multi-sport athlete throughout that time frame, from football, swimming, lacrosse, track and field. And then I used that to attempt to become a Navy SEAL early in my naval career, and unfortunately, I was not successful. But that really exposed me to this unique breed of individuals that you find out there. And unfortunately, those unique brand of individuals you get to meet are some of the hardest ones on themselves when they find themselves in a situation. And so when I was at Walter Reed, I was able to find adaptive hockey, sled hockey, and it's a form of hockey that people with severe disabilities can play. Even up to included, I've seen triple and quadruple amputees playing sled hockey because of the fabulous innovation by great tinkerers and engineers and people that see a problem and want to find a solution. And that really, is really inspiring to see people develop uh, products such as like a slapstick, which is a unique engineering device where as the player pushes down on the end, a stick blade pops out so that they can now interact with the puck. And so, and it was designed to work on a stub so that people who are missing their arms can still participate and play hockey. And so, if anybody wants to see some fabulous, outstanding athletes, look up sled hockey hits and pull up the Team USA and international teams playing, and you'll be surprised that these athletes are disabled, even though you can clearly see them missing limbs out there in full contact, full checking hockey. And so that was the other thing I noticed about that was the physicality of the sport as well and the team nature of it. Hockey is one of those unique sports where you have to be a team and an individual out on the ice both at the same time. You have to be able to hold yourself to that individual accountability so that you can succeed within that team structure. And that really helps me see breaking out of the shell where you had that stigma about being broken. And the team, the camaraderie, the nature of the locker room, and everything else really, you saw these guys come out of the shells where they'd be depressed, isolated, self-medicating, and slowly start seeing them come back into society. And when I got out and started doing that in the civilian side, and interacting with the local community where we didn't have giant military and we just had scattered veteran community, we really saw the usefulness in pulling veterans who had spent 5+ years isolated, where the only people they would interact with were their family or their fellow veterans, have them pull out of their shells and within 2 years be playing on teams of non-veterans, traveling, breaking that isolation and interacting with a community of people. And one of the things I notice is when you're in these disabled communities where you're not just surrounded by veterans, is when you're dealing and interacting with a child who's been disabled from the day he was born, it really brings you a perspective that allows you to stop feeling so sorry for yourself and the service and the injuries you did receive, because you got to enjoy a large portion of your life physically able-bodied while this child hasn't. And so that perspective is very helpful for helping people reacclimate into society. And so our hockey program is actually a national program through the USA Warriors. I think we have 4 or 5 sled programs across the country, as well as I think it might be 6 or 8 standing teams as well. It's nothing like seeing a double amputee missing both his legs out there skating on skates, and against like some of the professional hockey players in their retired teams. So now I'm long-winded and I apologize for that.
Oh, no, not a problem at all. That's fascinating. And it feels like that's another crossover of like just grit and determination too, of like the military spirit. I think that knowingly or unknowingly, that's a commonality among service members and working towards a purpose bigger than yourself, right? Like the team aspect of it, and that you touch on that with what you're up to too as well. And I know that you've done some tinkering yourself for mobility. Can you say more about what I know you've done some
Yeah.
creation of things in the past.
So after I was medically retired, I started the nonprofit, and the time I had to wait while to get my VA educational benefits in place. And so while I was going through school, the first 2 years, I got a little bored during my general studies, so I became a self-taught blacksmith and knife smith. Enough so that my skill got me invited to the TV show Forged in Fire on 2 separate occasions, which I didn't respond and didn't answer. It's bad business. I can get into that another side. The show's an awesome opportunity, but it was just bad for business. But because I had learned that about my 2 year mark while I was going through school, I took that skill set and I saw a need for that was a limitation I was putting on myself as a disabled individual, which was restricting my access to some outdoor recreational activities I really enjoyed because of the nature of having to move my body over bad terrain. And I was trying to go scuba diving at some beautiful sites in Massachusetts, where you have to climb over a bunch of rocks, including up to 6 foot rock heights, where you're having to carry heavy equipment and pass heavy oxygen bottles, which you can't drop, and air bottles and all this other stuff. And after we finished, I said I probably won't come back to this site because of how I know I'm going to feel tomorrow. And my friend looked at me, he goes, "Don't you wish you could just fly yourself right in the water?" And as he said that, he like pointed towards the back of my truck, and I got an inspiration for a zip line system that would just attach to the pickup truck. And so that weekend, I went out, got a bunch of steel, and using my knowledge as a blacksmith, and I invented and built a prototype portable zip line device that would attach to my pickup truck. So I threw it under my deck, forgot about it for a couple of weeks until I saw a flyer at school for entrepreneurship competition, idea competition, and I participated in that. And I was a finalist at the end of that journey. I was a finalist in 3 separate entrepreneurship competitions where they gave me something which was amazing to me called seed money, which at the time I had no idea. I'm like, what do you mean this is free money? And so it opened my eyes to the entrepreneur aspect of our culture in business industry. And I actually, because of that journey, I added entrepreneurship as a second concentration onto my degree path. And so while the device didn't pan out, it helped me find, like you mentioned, find those solutions for those very unique problems that are out there in our society.
Yeah, innovation. That's fascinating. And a lot of people, I think, might think veterans, oh, not very entrepreneurial. But in fact, maybe I'm a little biased, but I feel like some of the most entrepreneurial folks I know are veterans. Ian, you've done some work too in the building for your sport. Can you say more on what you've done? Or sorry, not Ian, Brandon. My bad.
Yeah. So let's see. Right. So I've also been quite entrepreneurial with stuff. When I was building the Bionic Eye is when I got into the motorsports because it was like 160 to 160 something hours a week in the office. I was sleeping underneath my desk. So that way, as a team lead, the other people who were there understood that if they wanted to put in extra time, it was appreciated. But I was constantly saying, you don't need to put in extra time. You should go home. You should get the rest. But that way, nobody felt like they were putting in hard work. But it was a project that I was extremely enthused by and felt was very important. That said, when I did have long breaks, like a weekend or a 3-day weekend or a holiday, I needed a way to blow off all of that steam that was like building up because I was only being able to sleep at home like maybe once or twice a week. And what I did was I went motorcycle racing and turned that into something where I became a pro. And in order to do that, I was on an electric motorcycle, which would take like 8 hours to charge. I had to invent a way to charge them much faster, like 15 minutes. And so I did. And we had some interns that were at our company from University of California, USC, SoCal. And they ended up finding it really interesting and assisting. And we ended up forming another company that was building those because other electric motorcyclers were like, shut up and take my money. So we really didn't have much of a choice other than to assist the community at that point and make a little bit of money doing it. Yeah, so when I do the entrepreneurial stuff, it's always a need.
Yeah, I like that. And as an entrepreneur, that resonates too. You know, there's generally like 3 buckets of entrepreneurship for me. And it's like, you have the problem, you're an industry expert, or there's like a new technology, right? You're like, has hammer, where's problem? And I guess along the lines of innovation, but also, you know, doing things outside of the norm. Coma, can you speak to women's rugby and how did you even I know of rugby because I've lived overseas once, and it's more popular overseas than here. But how did you come to rugby and find your home with that? And how is that sport changing and innovating, especially in maybe the veteran space too?
Sure. So I spent 2 years playing soccer and just at the time was looking for something else and was invited to a rugby practice. And I said to myself, nah, I don't think rugby's going to be for me. My father had gone to college in New Zealand. He would tell me about, oh, this person, broke a nose here and cauliflower ear here. And I wanted neither of those things and fell in love with it. And at the time, it was more of a club amateur grassroots type of sport, even though the first World Cup had been held in 1991, which the United States actually won. And one of the things that we have seen on the women's rugby landscape is both the growth of women's rugby from a grassroots perspective, from a youth and high school perspective, from a collegiate perspective, but also when rugby was included in the Olympic Games, that fueled a lot of growth and recognition of rugby in the United States because, of course, everybody loves the Olympic Games, everybody loves to support Team USA, and then because there was an Olympic pathway, it almost made the sport it legitimized it in the eyes of a sport consumer public that is used to professional types of productions plus the gravitas of being an Olympic sport. So that was sort of a new era in women's rugby, and rugby in general in the United States, but also in women's rugby especially, because in case you missed it, women's rugby won a bronze medal at this past Olympics in Paris, and it was a photo finish down to literally the last seconds of the last minute of the second half. And we came back from a deficit to beat Australia with no time on the clock. And if you haven't seen that clip, you should watch it because it will give any sports enthusiast goosebumps to see how the United States dug deep and literally scored a try 95 meters underneath the post, kicked the conversion, and snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. So I mentioned that because there's also been a drive and a desire for amateur rugby to become professionalized, especially as we think about being competitive in the Women's World Cups. In the UK, they have an established professional system. Other rugby unions have, say, national rugby unions have been making significant investments in the women's game, and that, of course, creates gaps in terms of folks who are resourced and can compete in international test matches on a consistent basis, and high-level amateurs who are basically self-funding a lot of their work. So it was sort of a groundswell from the amateur women's rugby community that was already competing at a high level and sending people to the U.S. national team to say, listen, if we're going to win a World Cup in the next cycle or the cycle after that, we need a professional league in the United States that capitalizes on the growth of women's sports and gives folks a destination where they can earn a paycheck for playing sport at the highest level and not have to go overseas in order to do that. So being from that community, having played various levels, up through and including that Women's Premier League, which is the highest amateur structure in the United States, we recognized there was a high demand for women's sports, a high demand for rugby, and the fact that rugby is now a little bit more of a household term, especially with, I'm not sure if you've seen the rugby athlete Ilona Maher, who is the largest, I think she has the largest TikTok following of any active rugby athlete. She's on Dancing with the Stars. She's got endorsements, but she has become the face of women's rugby in the United States, which we couldn't be more thrilled because she's such an amazing ambassador for what the inclusivity, what it brings to women. You can be powerful and feminine and however you want to define yourself. But it really was born from a need and a desire and hopefully a very opportune time in women's sports to launch a league domestically that not just satisfies the demand for more women's sports, but the uniqueness of having a full contact sport, for having a sport that has no rule changes between the men's and the women's. We think it's a really ripe time to invest in women's sports, and especially in a sport that's sort of having its moment, thanks to the performance of the women at the Olympic Games and the fact that we have a lot of young girls and young women who are now opening their eyes to the possibilities of not just sports, but playing a contact sport and recognizing that rugby could be a place where they could find a home.
really great. Yeah, I remember watching rugby for the first time, and I could hear the skin on skin contact of the players. Whereas in football, you sort of just kind of hear the clunk of equipment and padding, and but skin to skin, I was like, oh my gosh! Like I don't think the U.S. football teams would be up for this. The physicality of it was impressive.
Yeah, friction
And
burns are a thing, and now they have protective headgear and things like that. But made for some very interesting conversations. Like, what happened to your face? I'm like, well, there's this rugby match, and I'm resolving it.
in cauliflower ear, right? Not just for boxers.
Yes, and I'm thankful that my ears have no cauliflowers and my nose is intact.
The amount of finger hooks and eye gouging in rugby is always amazing too.
Yeah, hopefully we're
I've heard
moving
some
to a
fun
different
stories.
era in that.
Yeah.
Both my eyes are intact. The rest of my joints, not so much.
Yeah, yeah. Rugby is gaining popularity here. Do you feel like there is more military folks in rugby, perhaps because of their exposure to living overseas, or is there a veteran presence in rugby that
Massive, massive. Not just with the service teams, but there was a huge and thriving base rugby team culture. Just with how rugby has evolved, a lot of folks are now opting to play for teams that are off base or off post because of the level of rugby that they're able to be exposed to. But just this past week, there was a USA military tour to United Kingdom where they played two matches, one against British Army, one against the Royal Air Force, and that was a mixture of active duty and veterans. And it was an outstanding tour where the first game, I think we dropped 28-17, and then the second game, we won 33-7. So it's an amazing opportunity for veterans to stay connected. And there's people that I've known through the veteran rugby community for probably as long as I have been part of the rugby community and the veteran community. So it's and there's also teams that are comprised of veterans such as Old Breed, Band of Brothers that specifically reach out to veterans, especially veterans who may be looking for a community to support them, maybe going through some things, but it has been a lifeline, literally, for folks who need and want to be around folks who can support them and encourage them and be there for them and help them out when sometimes things look a little dark. Those are specific places where veteran rugby players have found a lot of camaraderie and solace and support.
Yeah, Ian echoed that as well. Brandon, did you come across a lot of veterans in your various sports?
There were a couple. So judo and jujitsu, that was primarily when I was in service. And then motorcycling, there's a couple of veterans that I bumped into, but it was something where, it gave us the ability to talk about things and have someone to know when you got to the track. But it's still a relatively small community. And yeah, I think maybe something that wasn't brought up as often, because a lot of times when I got to the larger competitions where I know there were more probably, just because that's what we gravitate to, like Pikes Peak, I'm sure there were quite a few vets there that were competing in that. But at the same time, when you're there, right? Like every time I did it, I was very, very focused on not flying off the edge of the mountain. One time I thought I was going to, but I somehow, instead of going off the mountain, I went into the mountain. I don't know how that worked, but it did. But come on, you actually gave a really good segue to something else that I did with motorcycles that led into the mental health area that you were talking about. So early on when I was doing the bionic eye thing, I was starting to get into machine learning and things like that for the algorithms. And I built my first AI on a motorcycle. We would ride around Los Angeles and like post to Twitter, and she had conversations with her fans and followers. And eventually I had to shut it down because I gave it secure keys, and then I lost my copy of the keys. So the only one that could connect to social media was the motorcycle. I couldn't track what it was saying with its fans or anything. And at the time, it was a hot topic because there were some other now since long forgotten AIs that I won't bring up that went off the rails publicly. That knowledge and the tools that I built way back then have actually come full circle now. Because during COVID, I took some time to meditate and spend with my daughter, pulled out of like the world, just losing its mind. And when I popped back out, I decided to have a look at how can I reintegrate again. And the best way that I knew how was through our community, through our veteran community. And I started with Act Now with Jay Salters and the education stuff that they have, and the community that they have. And I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot what it's like to work with people that have work ethic and know how to get things done. And if they don't know what you're talking about, they'll deadpan you and say, I don't know what you're talking about. Could you please tell me like I'm 5? And you cut through all the BS. It was a dream. And eventually I got connected with Fall In, which is run by Jamil Mateen, and he does a hackathon, at least one a year for vets and active duty and other agency individuals. And we had one for mental health. That was my first one to come back through. And the team that I had of Devil Dogs and Army, we didn't know if we were going to be able to get something done or not. But we picked a hard topic, right? Because if you're going to do it, go big. And we did. We chose suicidal ideation. And we built an AI after looking at some white papers and figuring some things out with our team that could detect it in journaling, because that's something that's pretty common in CBT stuff. I did a mental health startup prior to that as well, post the Bionic Eye. And the journaling portion that was able to detect the suicidal ideation worked even with a live demo where one of our teammates, Josh Mateo, he was running the screen while I was doing the talking, and I just gave him free rein, and he put in like military jargon and stuff that was really dark, but you wouldn't understand if you weren't from the vet community, and it picked it up right away. From there, we took second place. It was a 2-hour deliberation from the judges. First place was an equestrian center app, which was ready to go at that point. So they could immediately begin helping veterans. It was a really cool thing. I'd recommend equestrian stuff to everyone. And from there, we just decided to keep pushing. And there were some incidents that were vet related. The one in Maine, that reminded me, it's not only inward that the violence can be focused. Sometimes it's outward. And when someone has been trained, it's more difficult, right? So when we got started with this, I had some friends that I had lost and some family members. And I realized that we could add something else onto it. We added homicidal ideation into it. And then from there, that got me thinking about Sandy Hook and other events. And I realized that we could add in terroristic ideation. And then I realized Columbine, and I realized all the other school shootings that were going on and how we could help children and everything that was going on in the colleges right now, where we want to have activism and we want to encourage people to speak up and make change. But at the same time, we don't want it to go too far off the rails. We don't want people to be doing a lot of the things that have happened in the recent past. And then even when it comes to the political things, after we got all of that mental health stuff sorted, we realized that the individual that was the shooter at the Trump rally when everybody was still competing for the presidency, that was someone that could have been picked out if there was someone or something monitoring in the gaps. So the AI that we built from what we call Lifeline.vet, that's the name of the company, its focused and foundation is mental health and the ability to help people in crisis, but it has since spread to being able to help those who aren't in crisis by preventing these issues before they happen.
Yeah, and is that veteran focused as well?
Yeah, so the entire team was all disabled veterans. We now have a civilian who's SOF adjacent. She does coaching and seminars and things like that with special forces, NFL, other sports people, because there's a lot of the physical side of this for injuries that she can help with and how that hits the mental health side. And our primary focus and delivery is to veterans. We actually have here in Monterey, it's a really great county, and we've got, a couple of places here. There's an organization called the MVAO, which helped me go through my transitioning process. And they're really, really awesome. And they have said that they want to trial the AI terminal for veterans here. And there's also, the VTC in Monterey. Anyway, yeah, it's starting with veterans and then spreading to everybody else first.
Yeah, fascinating and good. And that's really good, solid work. Turning back to the sports lens, and this is for anyone, how has the anything to do with sports, your involvement in sports, whether that's as a player or a coach, how has that impacted your mental health, whether for the better or worse? And if the worst, what would you recommend to change that, right? Like, so I had a very mean high school volleyball coach, and I wish for her that I could have given her what culture and sports provides, is like leadership and culture training. But that was a formative experience. So I'm curious who else has had formative sports experiences, for the better or for the worse, that have been standout moments for you.
I think for me as a former, I transitioned into coaching when my playing career ended. And I think that there are so many things that you learn in the military that translate to just how do you work with people? How do you motivate people towards a goal? How do you create an environment where everybody feels like they can do their best? And unfortunately, I think that there are a lot of bad habits that might get learned with coaches who may not have had the ability to explore coaching as a discipline, or they're coached the way that they were coached and things have changed. So you get people who are repeating the same cycle of mistakes and not necessarily stepping back to say, how can I do this better? And how has the approach to coaching changed? So I too have had my share of not so good coaching experiences. But then when I transitioned to coaching, I very actively tried to seek out coaches as mentors whose approaches I appreciated, and other leaders, and also endeavored to not repeat the types of mistakes that I felt like I experienced, where I may not have been made to feel like I was part of a team or part of a program. So I think there's just a lot of things that we learn in, as members of the armed forces, in terms of how to lead and how to support and how to manage and how to hold people accountable, that can definitely translate. And I think that a lot of coaches may benefit from just having those open conversations, because just, the way that you were coached in 1990 or 2000 is not the way we would do it in 2024.
So true. Ian or Brandon?
Yeah, I think, like, when you grow up around the sports atmosphere, and then when you join the military, you realize that the leadership styles you face are very similar. You have your leaders, and then you have your tyrants. You have those who develop you not just as a a cog in the machine they have to operate, but also look out and how they can personally develop you as an individual. And we've all experienced that, the caring, compassionate coaches, as well as leaders, as well as the ones that make you regret the fact that you can't not choose to go to work the next day. Um, you know, where you have to face this individual and their bullying tactics and other types of ways. And so the the thing that I got the most out of experiencing both those types of people is it gives you the opportunity to witness how you want to be as an individual when you are in these roles yourselves. And even more so is how you can then choose that those values that you hold dear and you want to, and instill them in those coming up through the generation, the determination, the grit that if I was teaching a youth program, I think that is the skill I would focus on more than winning, because you are giving those kids a skill set that lasts their entire life. Even if that is, one of the things that my favorite facts about the military lifestyle is, a lot of people don't question how they managed to get us to like each other and agree to support each other, enough to even give up our lives for one another. Even when we're just meeting people and we're complete strangers, we still feel this inherent sense of community. And it's because we're all trauma bound by our shared trauma through boot camp and all the other experiences that we have to go through, that we volunteered to go through. And those shared challenges and stuff allows you to then vet people that in your life that you want to be able to seek assistance or to speak with on different things. And I use that to huge advantage during my customer discovery for my tech startup. I was having such a difficulty finding the right people to talk to in the right roles, especially amongst the civilian sector. But the minute I focused on only veterans and only those who had served or been involved in the U.S. military and the DoD, and explained that I was a fellow veteran and I'm just looking for a few minutes at a time to answer some questions, I got an 80% response rate on my customer discovery, which is unfounded. And I still use that as to my advantage today. If I need to find someone who knows something that I don't, and I need to pick their brain about something, I always go after the veteran community first, because more importantly is that also allows, there's a sense of transparency they bring to them. Like I believe it's what you mentioned it, Angie, and Coma. I think you brought it up a little bit too. You get the real world when you ask for it. You get the reality. You get the, don't beat around the bush. Don't feed me a load of BS. Tell me how you see it, opinion from these individuals. And they're going to say, Ian, what you're trying to do is fantastic, but comma, and they give you the constructive criticism versus the destructive criticism that you hear sometimes. So those are some of the big things that point out that it really allows you to pick and choose how you want to function as you grow as a leader, a coach, a mentor, and as an athlete yourself. Because eventually we all hit that day one day where we are no longer going to be able to be an athlete. So, and we have to choose either to move on with our lives or to pick up the mantle of coach. So, and Coma, I love what you're doing. I love it. I love the full contact sports and women. We do it in sled hockey as well. My co-founder of my program, she was on the women's national sled hockey team for a number, I think, well over a decade now. So I love it. Keep it up.
That's great, Ian. Thank you. Brandon, do you want to add anything?
Yeah. So transitioning from motorcycle racer to motorcycle coach for my daughter was a really massive thing, and I loved it. It was her fourth Christmas, and we got her a little electric motorcycle from this company called Stasic, and like all of the gear and everything like that. And she was riding it around town in Monterey, and everybody started to get to know her, and she would go into the little restaurants and stuff, and everybody would greet her and give her little snacks and things. It was the cutest thing ever. And it was not what I had previously associated with motorcycling. Because, me, I was like, yeah, I'm motorcycling, this is cool. But then when that happened and it was like a dad thing, I saw like the whole holistic and like heartfelt aspect of it. And it reminded me of when I got started as a way to sort of like release stress and things. And for her to be able to travel around town, she would ride all the way to the aquarium, 4 miles there and back, looking at like the ocean and seeing all of the seals and stuff like that. It was really cool. That was a really big thing. I enjoyed that tremendously. And now she started to do judo. And she says that she wants to do judo, but she only wants to do it if Dada is in the class with her. And that's like a tough thing, right? Because when it comes to judo, if I'm going to be in the class with her, sometimes there are tough things and you have to be like really rough about the way that you encourage people at certain points in time when they hit that limit, And I talked to the sensei there and he confirmed the same thing. His daughter is an Olympian. So we go to Bojikaryu in Marina, and his daughter is an Olympian. And even he had someone else that was doing a lot of the training. And so he was recommending the same thing. We'll have to see, though, we'll have to see how that goes. She's a very good negotiator. That's another thing that I started coaching her on. Very good negotiator, much to her mom's chagrin. But we'll see. Yeah.
That's great. I think I would echo the same concepts that we've been talking about here, and especially like Ian, you said this in so many words, like an example of what not to do, and like an example of who not to be, right? Like I I used to coach middle school girls volleyball, and I wanted like I was consciously aware of like every interaction I had is potentially someone's like lasting memory. And I didn't want it to be a bad one like I had. And so for me, I feel like um, I learned the best from messing up, which in the military is unfortunate place to mess up. But I'll never make that same error again, right? Like you get burned. And so in sports, I have the same mentality of like I'm going to be an influence in this child's life, and what do I want that to look like? A positive influence, and or just a kind word or a smile on a day that they needed, right? And if they don't remember me, that's fine too. At least I didn't leave a bad mark. And Coma, I liked what you said about coaching as a discipline. And I absolutely agree. That is something that sometimes might come natural to others, but I think it's also something that's learned and must be put in the forefront to break the cycle, right? Like there break the cycle of intergenerational trauma in veterans as well as potentially from sports athletes. Like the higher up you get, the there's bad people everywhere. But
My
thank you.
favorite is we're doing it this way because that's the way we've always done it. It's the most toxic words I've ever heard out of a leader's mouth. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, one thing you harped on, Angie, that's very important is the best lessons in life are those learned the hard way. And I once told one of my friends because they were really struggling with running a brick wall repeatedly, which is common in startup life. And I told them that unfortunately, resilience is only learned through the school of hard knocks. You have to go through tough, challenging times. I mean, you can jump on and listen to some very smart religious people who explain the same way. They explain, I asked God for courage, and He gave me a chance to be courageous. He didn't just grant you courage. You have to work internally for these self-development models is kind of the gist of what I get for it. And so what you said is very relevant.
Well, Ian, along those lines, I remember the words of a chaplain on my first deployment. He said, "Don't ask God to teach you patience because you're not going to like the lesson."
That's a good one. And Brandon, the ability to teach your daughter a new sport, and especially a sport you love, that must be an amazing feeling. And also it touches on like I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, and please feel free to elaborate, but martial arts is all about knowing yourself, right? And treating others a certain way.
Yeah, it's that's also been a big focus. So we started really young. As I mentioned, or as you mentioned, I studied Zen Buddhism post-military. I lived in the forest for a while, and when I came out of the forest, I traveled with a shaman. And then when I was done with traveling with the shaman, or when he was complete with what he was doing, then I went to the Zen Buddhist monastery, and then I transitioned back into civilian life, selling soap door to door. So I took the meditation portion and the patience portion from what I learned, and I tried to pass that on to my daughter. And then we ended up getting involved with our local church Shoreline here, and teaching her how to be connected to something that's greater than ourselves, basically connected with God. And that sort of a foundation at a really young age I've actually noticed really helped her in the martial arts space, because she's already knows a little bit how to center and how to breathe. And so when she calms down at the beginning of class, when they do their initial meditation, I can see like it melt out of her. And then I can see the other students that have been doing it for a while, how it melts out of them. And then I can see the new students that are there who are just learning these techniques for the first time, how they're still all fidgety. And like you can see they have all this pent up energy. It's amazing to see how the martial arts themselves and the training that children get through the various other aspects of life really leads into having resilience at such a young age for something that's gonna be tough. And the motorcycling was tough for her, and the judo is tough. I actually stopped posting our motorcycling stuff on Instagram. Laguna Seca was letting us go onto the track and do the racing stuff or riding around the track during some of these events. And I've got one that's queued up, but she fell off of the bike and like she fell and she had all of her gear on and stuff, but she went down and like her helmet, I don't know if it touched or if it almost touched, but I didn't say a word. I went, and then she got up and got back on the bike and I'm like, all right, let's go. And we kept going around the track and she set a track record later that day. So having that kind of resilience and ability to keep going is really, really good. At the same time, knowing where your limits are is another thing that's really, really good, because you have to know when to comply at a certain point too. So I don't know, she's only 5, but it's a complicated and really, really fun thing to figure out how to balance when doing that.
And to learn those skills as a young child. I mean, she's already
Brandon,
set up for success.
And Brandon, what you said about implementing martial arts at a very young age for children is, I think, very helpful. And I have my son's, he's turning 13 this year. We're getting ready to go full teenager mode, and putting him putting him in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at a very young age. It's more importantly at the right academy that has the right culture, which you want to
Yes.
instill into them, because there are very different cultures across gyms and across brands within this industry. And watching him, as you said, you can see them when they're young and they feed off the energy of others and they're going hectic and crazy in there. And then the older kids who have been at it for a while, and you see them calmly introduce themselves into the mix, and you start noticing the other kids just start calming down and start following through, and you see them looking up to them as they're doing drills and everything else like that. I think it's so vital. So you nailed it right on the head, Brent.
Yeah, thank you. Also, one other thing that I think you'll appreciate, really early on, I started teaching her computer things. And I think at like 2.5, I realized her favorite operating system is Linux. And the one that she uses all the time is Windows. So yeah, anyway, I thought you'd get a kick out of that.
Yep. I've given my son, we got 4 or 5 3D printers in the house going at any given time. He's got 2 of his own. And so, yeah, no, in the design software and learning how to do things that will be a skill set for the life, like learning how to code at a young age, I think is just as important and relevant as learning the beginning stages of language. And we had to make that decision early on when he was in 2nd grade, and we were told there was no programs for him since he was a little more advanced, and instead they were constantly restricting his advancement, and so the rest of the class could catch up. And so we ended up eventually moving to an online school system where he is self-paced. And the first year, after the first semester, he was in Spanish as a second language. He's on his 5th year now. He's doing computer science as an elective. And I think those are just vital skills that are just going to support him more so is give him the ability to make an informed decision when it comes to what I want to do with the rest of my life as well.
Yeah, same with sports too, right? All right, rapid fire last question. What is one sport you would like to try, or a sport that you wish was in the Olympics?
I kind of want to try the electric motorcycle racing that Brent is talking about. That sounds very interesting. To me, it sounds almost alpine-like, so you have to go up. I'm getting into mountain biking again after years of my injuries, trying to take it nice and slow and steady and enjoying that. But the one that I would like to see back in the Olympics was that insane one where it was downhill skiing as fast as you couldn't go. But unfortunately, we need to have a much better way, maybe a portable airbag system that can prevent serious injury. Because that when they showcased it during that brief demonstration, because they didn't even get to the medal portion of the competition because someone died in the initial stages, and they scrapped the entire sport from the Olympics that winter. So
Wow.
yeah, that would be an interesting one. That's just because it was the first one that popped in my head.
I have always wanted to try curling.
Yeah, same.
There's places here in New York City where they will teach you how, but like I think it's just awesome. It's just one of those things. Maybe I'll go to a learn to curl event and I'll send you some pictures, but
Yeah.
I think it's just so cool.
Great.
You literally
Brandon?
said about the patience. That's amazing because when you watch what they do and how they get that thing to stop where they want it to, there's like, you've got math, you've got intuition, and then you also have patience built into that. I think it would be cool to see skydiving added to the Olympics for, landing in a specific zone. Something like that I think would be really, really cool to add to the Olympics.
Agreed. Yeah. Any questions from the audience? I saw one hand up earlier. If you want to raise your hand again, I'll click the button to allow you to talk. There you go, Greg. Go ahead.
Well, one thing I'm excited about is the flag football is going to be added to the Olympics this time. And
how's it going?
sorry,
Okay.
We're just gonna give it a
Yeah.
so
Flag football.
that's what I'm excited about. I think it's kind of due time for everyone to get acknowledged with that, and worldwide, with getting that acknowledgement, it's going to make it really popular for kids in the United States, and with with that happening, the kids going from tackle football to flag football as well, and making it okay to just play football
Right.
in general, and then it just um, kind of just is like a snowball effect. So you just play sports more often. I like that, so I'm really hopeful about that.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I agree. I feel like flag football is the way to keep football in the world without all the nasty injuries and concussions that kids are getting. But that's a whole other panel discussion for later. I do want to thank our panelists for being here. So we'll wrap it up. And so this has been an amazing discussion. Thank you, everyone. And of course, I'd like to thank our each one of you and for your incredible thoughts and contributions to our Culture Roundtable on veterans in sports. And I'd like to thank our attendees too, because your desire to be better leaders and build better organizational culture is key to spreading a world with building a world with better humans in it. And if you'd like to learn more about what we do at Culture and Sports or different programs or learning and education opportunities, go or listen to more Culture Roundtables, or we have more podcasts as well. Please visit us at cultureandsports.com. And again, our goal here with Culture and Sports is to help organizations and coaches identify, assess, and positively change a toxic culture. And we do that most by having discussions like this, writing about it, having an annual leadership summit, and we also have a Sports Leader of the Year award, as well as other outreach efforts. So again, cultureandsports.com. Thank you, panelists, for your time, and participants for being here and learning. Appreciate your time today. Take care.